welcome. I hope you've got your cup of coffee. I have some hot tea tonight, and I also have a few cats running around who are probably going to run through the camera or make some noise or otherwise interrupt, so just roll with it. Today we are talking about some differences between foster care and adoption, because when I first started my foster care journey, I actually didn't really realize they were all that different, which is really silly looking back because they're hugely different, but it's one of those things where if you don't know, you don't know. So that's why we're talking about it. Now, the shortest answer possible on the difference between foster care and adoption is that foster care is temporary and adoption is permanent. Like, there's a reason they call it a forever family when it comes to adoption. But it is, of course, more complex than that. In foster care, the biological parents still have rights, and you're still very enmeshed in foster care world. You have a lot more obligations and responsibilities to meet, and there are more eyes on you and more requirements. For example, in Texas here, you have to get permission from biological parents to give your child a haircut. And although that may sound odd the first time you hear that, there are actually some cultural reasons for that. Like, hair is really important in multiple cultures, and so it's one of those things you want to make sure that you're respecting that child's birth culture and having their hair in a way that respects that birth culture. And I also probably, like, I wouldn't pierce a child's ears or something without asking the birth parents, or maybe seeing if that's something they want to do on a visit or something like that. I don't know. It's just one of those things that maybe feels a little bit like overstepping. But in adoption, of course, there's nobody to ask about a haircut. There's nobody to ask about ear piercing or anything like that. Like that, that's all on you. Now, also in foster care, you're still going to have those monthly visits from the caseworkers. You are still going to need to turn in all the paperwork from all the medical appointments that you go to and things like that. And those things are off the table after adoption as well, unless you have other foster kids in the home or something, of course. But ultimately, after adoption, that's the same as if you had given birth to that child, or if your partner had given birth to that child. And this is sort of a comparison I like to make. To me, foster care is a lot like teaching, where teachers build a really strong relationship with that child. They teach them some life lessons. They really have a strong bond, and that child may remember that teacher for many years, or even forever. Like, I still remember quite a few of my teachers, probably all of them. But there comes a point where the teacher and child no longer have that relationship, that bond. And that, to me, is similar to a foster child going back home. And in some cases, like, you really miss the student, right? The teacher's really sad about that parting of ways, or even the child is sad about that parting of ways. But it's not forever. That teacher and student are not together forever. As opposed to adoption, like, think about you as an adult and your family. If you have healthy relationships with your family, you might call your parents after a bad day at work. You might call to ask for advice or how to fix the garbage disposal or something. Or you might call them when you're really excited about something, and you're going to maybe visit them on holidays, and they're going to come visit you. And that is exactly what adoption is. It's a full commitment to being a forever family, exactly what that is, just as if you had given birth to that child. And now there are some blurred boundaries, of course, like if that former foster youth maybe doesn't have other safe adults, maybe you do stay as a long-term mentor for that person. I mean, there's still, of course, some outliers there, but in general, I'm just trying to give a general case. So in Texas, where I'm going with this before I get it all confusing, what I'm trying to say is you can do both. So what you could do is kind of start out with foster care, and the biological parents still have rights, and then you're just open to seeing what happens. Like, you're open to adopting if that becomes a possibility. And so that's called foster to adopt, where you foster the children even while parents have rights, and then rights get terminated. Then after what happened next is there's some time frames where they can appeal the termination, And then, you know, after those are expired and they look for other family members, all that, and after you and the children live together for 6 months, then the ball can get rolling for adoption. And some of those things can happen at the same time. Like if you're waiting on the appeals window, you're obviously living together already. So like the 6 months can happen at the same time you're waiting on the appeals. That's, you know, they don't make you start another 6 months after the appeal process is over. Excuse me. So what I'm trying to say with that is adoption isn't necessarily instant, but that you can foster and adopt, or you can foster and see what happens. Or you can go the opposite way. If you are not comfortable with that uncertainty, if you are not comfortable with feeling like you're going to get attached and then the kids are going to go home, whatever the reason may be, you can do what's called matched adoption or straight adoption. And that's where you work with your caseworker and you talk about what age range and what gender you're comfortable with, how many kids you're comfortable with, and what disabilities and behaviors you're comfortable working with. And then you, or the caseworker works to find a child or children who are already available for adoption. But even if you do that, you do still have to foster those children for 6 months before you can move to any sort of formal adoption. And again, good reasons for that. You need to make sure that you and the children are a good fit and that y'all are going to be safe and happy together for the rest of your lives before you move to that adoption phase. So, still not instant. But that's called matched adoption if you want to do that route. Or you could do what I did, and I think it's less common actually, but when I first started my foster journey, I also was very adoption focused. That has since changed now that I've had some experience, but I wanted to start a family. I wanted to have my family already set. I didn't want to risk losing, all those reasons. And so what I did was I specified that I would prefer to foster children who were already legally free for adoption. So it wasn't a commitment to adopt a specific child. It wasn't a commit to adopt at all. It was just saying, I want to foster, but, send the kids my way who are already legally free. Let's see how it goes. No commitment. And so that's another way to go about it. I have not adopted yet, but it's an option. That's an option. Okay, so now let's talk about special needs adoption, because that is probably another misconception. And this is a Texas term, so if you're in another state or country, I apologize, but special needs adoption in Texas. So if you're in Texas and you hear the word special needs, your first assumptions are probably going to go to disability, right? Because that's how we speak of it in education world. But that's not what it means in adoption. Special needs adoptions are going to qualify for ongoing services after adoptions, things that'll help with college, monthly assistance, some health coverage, things like that. You can, I'll do a whole separate video on that, and you can Google special needs adoption Texas and read all about it. But although it includes children with disabilities, documented disabilities, what they're looking for is children who are harder to place for adoption. So older children or minority children or sibling groups, because it's easy to get a baby adopted, right? And so how we're defining it in Texas is white children who are ages 6 and up, children who are not white, ages 2 and up, any sibling group, or let's say you adopted 2 children and then 3 years later the birth mom had another baby who then gets placed with you and you adopt. So even though you're only adopting 1 child and it's a baby, they're going to join their siblings, and so it's still considered like a sibling adoption. So that would be a special needs adoption. Or if the child does indeed have a documented disability. So let's say, excuse me again, you have an 18-month-old who's diagnosed with Down syndrome. So even though that child's only 18 months and they're by themselves, they have Down syndrome, it's documented, that's a disability, and they're still going to be in that special needs adoption category. Now, before we go, let's talk about 2 more types of adoption, which I don't have any personal experience with, but that way you can look them up if you are interested. There's what's called domestic infant adoption, and that's where you are adopting a child who a a birth mom is voluntarily giving up, usually a newborn, and that costs it quite a bit of money. Usually it doesn't go through the foster care system though. That is a woman or people who are voluntarily giving up that child, and they're even maybe picking out the birth parents. That's called domestic infant adoption. And then there's international adoption, and you've probably heard of that one as well, and that one is also generally quite expensive. And if you want to go that route, what you'll want to do is look up various countries and their requirements. Some countries you have to be married, some countries you can't be gay, some countries you have to be in a certain age range, or you have to have been married a certain number of years. You know, just look up the requirements for various countries if that's the route you want to go, and go for it. You know, any adoption is better than any adoption is good adoption. So it's not like my expertise is going to be in foster care. Of course, I know nothing about international adoption or domestic infant adoption, but if those are the routes for you, then those are the routes for you. Right. Thank you for joining me. See you soon.